So now we're turning our attention to the microscopic structures found within the kidney, and this is where we're really going to get into urine formation. And so the functional unit on a microscopic level of the kidney is called the nephron. It's the part that's actually going to be producing that urine. And you have a lot of these. You're looking at over 1 million nephrons per kidney. That's a lot of nephrons. So what do these nephrons look like? So we see this image here, and it looks like a convoluted mix of tubules going in various directions. But if we were to flatten it out, it really wouldn't be too complicated. We have some arteries and veins, right? Renal vein here, renal artery in red over here. We're going to have this little tiny arteriole. It's called the afferent arteriole. I like to think of afferent arrives at the nephron. And then as we leave from the nephron, we leave through the efferent arteriole, or exit. Think E for exit. That might help you remember those. We have the glomerulus, also known as the Bowman's capsule, glomerular capsule as well. That's going to be this bulbous structure here with this kind of knot of blood vessels. We have the proximal convoluted tubule. Think proximal as in close proximity to the glomerulus, and it's going to make this kind of S-like shape, like a backwards S. We then have the loop of the nephron, or loop of Henle, depending on what resource you're looking at, which is the part of the nephron that dives down and then back up. As we dive back up, we have the distal convoluted tubule, which is this other kind of twisty part, and it's in the distance. That might help you remember that. And then this collecting duct is at the very, very end, where we're going to collect up all the urine that we've produced throughout the nephron. And these nephrons are situated kind of riding along that line between the renal cortex, which is up here, and the renal medulla, which is down here in this pink color. So let's talk about each of the pieces that I just pointed out on the image. We have the glomerulus, which has capillaries, those blood vessels, inside of this capsule called a glomerular capsule or a Bowman's capsule. And this is where we're going to start pulling things from the bloodstream. These capillaries are going to be porous, right, where we can actually filter things out from the blood. The proximal convoluted tubule, that first kind of twisty bit, is going to be an epithelial layer. It has microvilli, and we're going to be reabsorbing certain components, mainly reabsorbing things that are still really useful. We dive down to the loop of nephron, right, or the loop of Henle, which is that U-shaped structure where we dive down, and this is where we're going to be worried about retaining water and salt. So reclaiming water, reclaiming salt. And then the distal convoluted tubule, as we move into that last part that's all twisty, this is where we're going to be pulling some more things from the blood and putting them into the tubule. We'll talk about those components there in just a minute. And then lastly, those collecting ducts. Again, you're going to have multiple nephrons all connecting to the same collecting duct, where we're going to be basically collecting up the urine to send it down to that renal pelvis, through the ureters, and eventually to the bladder. So what are the 3 steps in urine formation? Glomerular filtration is step 1, tubular reabsorption is step 2, and tubular secretion is step 3. So let's get into each of these steps. In glomerular filtration, right, we're looking at that glomerulus where we have these blood vessels, and we're going to be pulling some components out from the blood there. But only some things can get pulled out. Not everything's going to get pulled from the blood and into the capsule. When we're looking at what gets pulled out, we're mainly looking at small things. Things like water, things like salt ions, small nutrients like glucose, nitrogenous waste products like urea and uric acid. These are all small molecules. Things that are not going to filter, meaning they're going to stay in the bloodstream, they're not going to end up in the nephron, are things like plasma proteins. Remember, proteins are really, really big molecules. And the formed elements. So things like red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. They're also really big. They're not going to filter. They're going to stay in the bloodstream, just as they should. So we're only filtering out things that are small. Things like water, things like urea, things like glucose, and things like salt ions, like sodium. But if we have all these important things like water and salt and glucose filtering out, we don't want all those things that we filtered out to end up in the urine. Some of these things we want to reclaim, and that's where we get to tubular reabsorption. So if something is still useful, like glucose or some salt or water, we want to reclaim it. So tubular reabsorption is that process of reclaiming useful molecules or nutrients and putting them back into the bloodstream. You saw that mix of capillaries surrounding the nephron. That's how we're going to pull things from the nephron and put them back in the bloodstream, into those capillaries. Tubular secretion is another way for us to filter things out. So if we have, let's say we're taking a medication and there's a component that we're going to excrete out. Right? So you take some antibiotics and you have metabolites from your antibiotics, or hydrogen ions, or creatinine. We can push these into the nephron in this secondary way, right, called tubular secretion. We're secreting things like drug metabolites, hydrogen ions, and creatinine into the nephron. This is one process you'll definitely want to be familiar with. You should know what the nephron looks like, what structures are found in the nephron, what the 3 steps to urine formation are: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion, and know what's happening during each of those 3 steps. This is something that I see students commonly either mix up or forget about, and I know for a fact that this is something that I will ask of you. So make sure to pay attention to it in detail.